Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we're holding a very special press conference to alert you to two very special and important, exciting initiatives that are currently underway within the Ministry of Education. The first being a baseline inspection of schools, and the second being a governance review of the education system. Let me first introduce the panel to you. In the middle, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister of Education. To my immediate left, Mr. Winston Connolly, our Counselor for Education. Next to the Minister, we have Mrs. Mary Barman, who is our lead inspector. And to the far left, we have Mr. Roland Meredith, who is a consultant here on behalf of KPMG. As I said, this press conference is being called to talk about two initiatives. The first initiative is a baseline inspection of schools. The baseline inspection of schools is being done because the ministry has not done inspections of schools for some time in a holistic manner. And so the minister thought it was important for us to set a baseline, understand where we are currently, and set a good foundation for us to go forward with future inspections and obviously geared towards making improvements in the education system. The inspection is going to be based on 4 criteria, and I'll list them for you. The first is student progress and achievement, effectiveness of teaching and its impact on learning, leadership and management, and the quality of provision of student outcomes in the foundation subjects of English and mathematics. To carry out these inspections, the ministry has contracted Mrs. Mary Bowerman, who is very familiar with our system. She's no stranger at all. Mrs. Bowerman is a veteran of the public education system in the Cayman Islands. She most recently was the lead inspector in our inspections unit, and after retiring, we contracted with her to come back in and provide these inspections for us. She will be leading a team of persons to carry out these inspections. And in fact, these inspections have already begun, and we expect them to be, the pre-inspection process started in August 2014. We expect all of the school inspections to be completed by June of 2015. As I said, we also have Mr. Roland Meredith. Mr. Meredith is here on behalf of KPMG, who we've contracted with to perform a governance review of the education system. So that governance review is going to be looking at 4 criteria as well: educational governance, provision of student outcomes in primary and secondary education in the public education system, provision of evidence-based recommendations for improvements to our system, and a look at opportunities for greater public-private partnerships in delivering education in the public education system. You'll hear from the Minister, obviously, and Council. You'll also hear from Mr. Meredith and Mrs. Bowerman. The governance review started this month, November 2014. We expect this review to be finished by January 2015. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the Minister, who will give further details on these exciting initiatives.
Thank you very much, Acting Chief Officer. And good morning, everyone. Good morning to you all who have joined us, and members of the press, but also to those of you listening on Radio Cayman and watching us on CIG TV. Thank you for taking the opportunity to hear what we have to say this morning. As the Acting Chief Officer said, this really is exciting, but it's also groundbreaking in the sense that the country has never had, with respect to the inspections process, we've never had a baseline inspection process of all of government schools in any given defined time frame such as this. So I have tasked the team, and they have so ably delivered thus far, to develop a program to have all public schools inspected by the end of this academic school year. And as the acting chief also spoke about, the purpose of the education governance review is to help us look at the system, the structures, the policies, the programs, and basically how that is actually translating in terms of implementation as well. And I think it's important to just say right off the bat, the purpose of all that we're doing and all that we're attempting to do, and my focus as Minister of Education, and Councillor would share those views as well, is that we are looking to ensure that whatever we do in public education, we're putting the needs of the children first. So that is the premise that we are working from with respect to all of the activities that we have charged the team in the ministry and the department to carry out. But also, at this point, it's important for us to look at what we have in place and how we're actually delivering on ensuring that the needs of our children are being met to the best and most effective manner, given the structures, given the resources, given the investment that the government is making in public education. And so the whole purpose for these two very important, separate but equally complementary processes that are happening in tandem is for us to get that whole system view of what the education system currently, what pertains today, what is working well, what have we done over the past several years that have borne fruit and fruition, and what should we continue to be doing and strengthening and supporting. But equally, where are the gaps? Where are the areas that we know that we may not necessarily be doing all that we should be doing, but not just knowing about it, but how do we actually go about addressing those issues? And so what I'm hoping for by having both the review to help us look from a systematic perspective, as well as the inspections, the on the ground at each school, what is actually happening in each school, and that includes the Lighthouse School as well. What is actually happening in our system in terms of delivery, implementation, and therefore outcomes that the children experience and their performance. It's important that by having this kind of a holistic approach, we don't just look nationally, but we also look at how our children are doing compared to the rest of the world. And that's an important aspect that we very much believe as a government is critical because, as I've said on a number of occasions, our children are competing globally without even leaving the shores of the Cayman Islands. The economic model that we have here in this country requires that our children be able to compete on a global scale just to be able to access the employment opportunities locally, given the way our economy is structured. So we need to ensure that our children are doing just that. And so by actually engaging independent assistance and advice through the form of KPMG and their Center of Excellence in Education, they're working very closely with their UK arm, which has and Roland can possibly talk about the experiences of why he was contracted by KPMG to assist in this process, to ensure that we have that global perspective. Where are the best practices? Where are the issues that are unique to our situation, but how can we further improve our system to ensure that we have and we deliver on what we're expected to do as a country for the benefit of our children? And of course, that means all stakeholders, including parents, students themselves, obviously, educators in the system, as well as other stakeholders such as employers and other concerned citizens. How can we all play a part in ensuring the delivery of public education is what we expect as a country and what we demand with respect to the performance of our people. So that's really, in a nutshell, why we have commissioned these reviews at this time, because it's critical that we actually have an understanding of where we are now before we talk about making any fundamental decisions about where we want to go. And we need to take stock, and that baseline inspection is an important tool to help us taking stock, but also looking behind the scenes, looking at the data mining, looking at the structures, looking at the interplay between ministry, department, schools. That sort of education governance review is also critical to see whether or not there are things that we can do to improve that. And of course, the ultimate goal would be, as I said, to hopefully encourage other players in the market, other persons, other stakeholders that aren't necessarily involved to the extent that we would like them to be involved, because the adage that it takes a village to raise a child is very much a part of the education philosophy that I think we need to develop as a country. And so these inspections and this review will hopefully take us one step closer to being able to have a roadmap as to how we can achieve that in a more effective and efficient manner. So on that, I will actually turn it over to Councillor Connolly, who can talk to us more about some of the stakeholder reviews, our stakeholder engagements that we've had. We've had many, we've listened, and a key message that have come out from a number of these engagements, having talked to principals, teachers, is that there needs to be more done to address the needs of our children. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister, and good morning to the viewing and listening audience and to the press. As the Minister said, we've made a very concentrated effort to really engage all stakeholders in this discussion. We've had regular meetings with principals, teachers, we've had forums with students, parents, and the focus is on the primary and secondary government schools. we thought as a government that it's very important to have that holistic view, because we can sit here and try to dictate education and miss a lot of what actually pertains. And so, it was very important to have the opportunity to discuss with this wider group, including employers, because ultimately they are the persons buying our product, and to really talk about a number of issues. And the interesting things that came out of that was the need to focus on leadership and management in schools, including autonomy. We talk about student progress and achievement. But most importantly, I think that we also realized through these discussions that we really need to focus on special needs. And that means everything from gifted and talented to, those that really can't access some of the curriculum because of special education needs. And, when we embarked on this process, and we talked about having a baseline, a kind of line in the sand where we can really move from, that was embraced by these forums because people were anxious to get their message across to us. And I think, some of them, because it was the first time in a long time, they were very forthcoming. And that was, an important dynamic from this exercise. People were empowered to speak out and to really hone in on what their view of education is in the Cayman Islands. And the minister, from the beginning, even before she became minister, and what she campaigned on was the independent inspections of our schools. Because, whilst we can read the statistics and see, that we're making progress, and it's coming from within in a lot of instances, and it's important to get somebody like a KPMG on board, somebody like a Mary Bowerman, that will look at this from a purely objective standpoint. And this is including consultation with the various stakeholders, students, parents, employers, principals, teachers, and having the public really focus on what education will become in the Cayman Islands. I think that we also should mention that there is a survey for those listening and watching today on the Ministry of Education website. So anyone that hasn't been in these forums to date can access and have their say as well. And that again is exciting because we're actually going to be guided from the bottom up instead of top down, which I think is an interesting phenomenon that's occurring in this new era of governance. And that also then goes on to the next stage, trying to engage the community to participate in how education is disseminated in the public schools. And that includes putting in, a view on the community being a part and parcel every single day of what education becomes. Not, well, we'll sit you down in a room, we'll get some points and then we'll take or not take those on. We want the community engaged day in, day out in what the minister just described as the village raising the child. And we need to get back to that holistic approach. So in the end, we realize that the children are the most paramount piece of this exercise. But at the same time, we need to realize that it's not just government's responsibility to educate our children, but a country wide, mandate. We all have to do our part. And part of that is trying to engage with the correct professional advice and guidance. And so, to that end, we're very excited that KPMG has come on board. We've seen a lot of what they've been able to produce elsewhere, and that's exciting. But also that we have our own Caymanian inspector involved that can give that Caymanized viewpoint, because it's not good enough to say best practice is X and then you don't filter that in to the needs of our particular community, because we've seen where that off-the-shelf approach doesn't really assist anyone in the long run, because we're not dealing with apples and oranges, or apples and apples. We're dealing with apples and oranges. But at this time, then, I'd like to introduce Roland Meredith and Mary Bowerman, who will be able to give you a bit more detail on both the education review, and Roland will talk about that, and also Mary will give you her viewpoint on the baseline inspections and what she's doing there. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to just preface my comments, if I may, just by saying a massive thank you to everybody who I've met with so far here on the island with this particular piece of work. The warmth of the welcome that I've been given and the openness with which I've been treated, certainly in terms of the conversations I've had with people, have been really quite remarkable and something that I'm not used to. So thank you very, very much for that. KPMG reached out to me through their international education group to come and do this particular piece of work because for the last 14 or 15 years, this is the kind of work that I've done, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world as well. So I've worked at a very, very strategic level as part of the Building Schools for the Future program in the UK, where I was the education consultant for that particular program, setting the key performance indicators for the national program. I then worked with at least 30 local education authorities, the sort of the regional authorities in the UK that deliver education. And then during that time as well, I've worked with either directly or through teams of consultants who I've led somewhere in the region of 250 schools, developing a new vision and a new process for the delivery of education. So that's the background that I have and the reasons perhaps why I've been invited to come and actually carry out this particular review. I had 30 years of experience. In fact, the whole of my working life has been spent in education. So I worked for 12 years in secondary schools as a teacher first and then as a manager, and then worked for another 9 years in further education colleges before I moved over to become a consultant. Whilst I've been doing that, my work has focused very much, certainly in the last 9 years, on change in education. Helping and supporting sponsors and education authorities to set up or to design new schools. Now, the process here is really important in many respects because if you're going to spend millions of pounds of public money building new school buildings, time and energy setting up new structures for delivering education, we need to be sure that those things are applicable and fit for purpose for the future, not just for now. And this is why I found the approach that's being taken here on Cayman so very refreshing, because everybody has been very prepared to talk about where we need to be in 10 years' time, where we need to be in 15 years' time. And so that's very much the process that I'm engaged in here at the moment. I spent some time before arriving looking through the data, looking through the policy documents, looking at the vision and mission and ethos statements that the government has for education here on the island. So I've reviewed a lot of that material already, so I came with a picture. That picture has been expanded and enriched and changed to many degrees by the very many people who I've met. So I have spent time as part of the first week that I was here visiting schools, spending time with principals, spending time with teachers, and talking to learners. I've also been carrying out a number of stakeholder interviews. Normally this would be with one or maybe two or three people. So I had a very, very interesting meeting just yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. I'm beginning perhaps to lose track of time, with 22 teachers all in a room together and with 4 other teachers on a Skype program in the back. So that was an interesting experience. My experience is usually that when you work with teachers in that way, they're probably worse behaved than children in the classroom. But actually your teachers were very, very well behaved, and I got a huge, huge amount from that particular meeting. I have further stakeholder interviews to carry out with PTA presidents and with employers. So I'm trying to meet as many people as I can and put flesh on the bones of the documentation and really try to understand the very essence and the very ethos of education as it currently is on the island. But my specialism is very much around trying to understand and trying to help the people that I work with understand what the curriculum of the future should contain so that young people can develop the skills, the knowledge package, and the personal qualities and strengths they will need to be successful in the world they find when they leave school. Not as it is now, but as they will find when they leave school. And everybody's been so open and willing to engage in that conversation. And again, that's something that is, I had to say, quite unusual, so that's been incredibly refreshing. We've also done some exploration around what implications that different what might have on how it's delivered, the way learning and teaching takes place, the way we support learners, every learner, including those learners who have special educational needs or those learners who have emotional and behavioural barriers to their learners. So we're covering a huge amount of ground. The reason for that is I cannot feel able to recommend any governance, structural or organisational change to the delivery of an education system unless there is some understanding of the overall direction in which that education system is going. It's no good me coming and recommending a whole load of things as the situation is now. I need to be able to recommend things that will work for the situation as it develops and as it will be. Structures and governance that will help that process by driving it and by pushing in the aspiration and by leading that particular process. So that's where I am at the moment. When I go back to the UK, I'm going to analyse and evaluate and synthesise all of this really, really quite wonderful material, some of it. I've been so impressed by some of the things that I've seen. And then I will produce a report on the basis of what I find or what I've found. And I'm hoping that that then will be something which will present a series of possibilities for you on the island to take steps in a direction that you have agreed is a good direction for the education system here to go in. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to hand now over to Mary Bowman.
Okay. Thank you and good morning to everyone. Just a brief background about myself. I am, in fact, a Caymanian, as Councillor indicated, and I went through the school system myself as a child, and then I have taught in both government and private schools over a long time, many years. As an Ofsted trained inspector, I began doing inspections on an occasional basis from around about 1997. And because of my background as a Caymanian and through my inspection training, I found that I was very familiar with the context of education here, and I was able to empathize with the teachers and what has been done, because from the time that I was a child, education has come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but we are making progress. I joined the local school inspectorate in 2003, and I moved through the ranks there, and from inspector to senior inspector, deputy chief inspector, and all of this has given me a special insight, I feel, into the needs and the challenges that the system here faces. And I think that perhaps this was why I was brought in to lead these inspections and to tasked with finding a team that would fulfill the purpose for which we had been commissioned, that the Minister has requested. Now, I'm working with a team from the UK, and the reason for this is that the government schools on the Cayman Islands are all based on the British national curriculum, British national model. And therefore, it's important that we found someone with experience in that realm. There are not many jurisdictions that do carry out school inspections, And so it had always been our practice in the local inspectorate to look to the UK to supplement our core team, and that is what we have done. And after researching various inspection providers in the UK and taking into account the special needs that we had here, the special requirements of the minister, that this should be a baseline inspection, not our usual full inspection, but a baseline inspection with a much more narrow focus. We chose the ISI consultancy, the Independent Schools Inspectorate Consultancy, to work with us. Now, ISI has worked in about 50 different countries, and they are regularly monitored by Ofsted for quality assurance purposes. They have a large pool of inspectors, very large and very experienced, and in conversations with them, communication with them, we determined that they had the capacity to respond to the scale of this project, because as Minister pointed out, never before have we actually done baseline inspections where all government schools have been inspected back to back, as it were, within one academic year with a much more narrow focus. And we found that they were able to complete the requirements in the stipulated time frame, as the Minister said, within this academic year. Other inspection providers were, of course, considered, but I think ISI was chosen because the terms of costing, the flexibility of their scheduling, their deployment, the way they went about understanding exactly what it was we needed and wanted, and the fact that they felt that they expressed how they would meet our requirements in a very definitive way and clear way, which I was satisfied meant that they were prepared to do the background work that was needed and had the capability to do so. Now, just a little bit about the inspection process itself. As I said, this is a baseline inspection, so it's different from anything that we've done in Cayman before. But it follows basically the same pattern as any inspection, and so there's a lot of pre-inspection work that has to be done. School personnel, we had meetings with school personnel and with relevant people in the Ministry of Education about what has been done in schools. We provided pre-inspection questionnaires for parents and for staff. We collected and analyzed student performance data. We amended all our documentation for regular inspections to suit the different scenario of a baseline inspection. And I actually met with the inspection provider, ISI, in London and talked to their chief the head of the consultancy there and their chief inspector. And that was very useful so that they could ask me any questions and fill in any gaps where they were, wanting some more information. And I was able to give them some more information about the background here. And then all the documentation that we had collected, in whatever form it was, was forwarded to them for their own perusal and their own analysis. So that was all done pre-inspection. And then during inspections, what do? Well, we, of course, observe lessons, look at teaching, learning, what's actually happening. We've been listening to children reading, because at the moment we have been working in primary schools. We have had interviews with principals, with staff, with students. We've looked at their work in detail across the ability range and across the range of all the classes from years 1 to 6. We've attended assemblies, and of course we've been recording evidence in a very systematic way, remembering that this is a narrow focus. After this is all over, we are going to, all the evidence will be collated and any queries followed up. The team will have corporate agreement on all the decisions made, and that any findings are all, they have to be evidence-based. We have to have the evidence for anything that we are saying, and we have to corporately agree any recommendations. A report will be drafted, and it will express the overall effectiveness of the school, its particular strengths and weaknesses. We'll make some recommendations, not only specific to the school, but for the Department of Education Services and for the Ministry of Education. And then all of this will go back to the UK for cross-referencing purposes where there will be quality assurance and it will be checked for consistency. And at that point, schools will receive a draft report which they can look at and check for factual accuracy before the final report is published. So it's a fairly long process, but very organized, very specific in this instance. Thank you.
Well, I think that pretty much is the overview of what we wanted you to kind of understand and take away today regarding why we're doing this, what the purpose, the importance of having such a program and doing it in a timely and expeditious manner. Now, I know Mrs. Bowerman spoke about that it is a narrow focus, and quite frankly, I wanted the full scale for all schools, but the reality is I was, you know, the time frame was just not possible. But the importance of setting the baseline cannot be underscored from our perspective as leaders, because we have to understand and know what is happening in not just one school, but all of our schools, to be able to say what the foundation is to build on that and to make whatever changes. So although the focus was narrow, it was targeted. We want to know what's happening with teaching and learning, what's happening with leadership, what's happening with respect to results as it relates to English and mathematics, literacy and numeracy, which we know are the cornerstones of any future success or current success of our children being able to access the curriculum, and the other aspect of the inspection, which is being looked at, the fourth. So with respect to what happens next, once we have the reports from the various agencies, we intend to look at them and to make a decision. Obviously, then that now needs to happen. We need to then draw out the decision-making process to include the rest of the caucus and cabinet. And as a government, we then will take a decision as to where we want to go. But it'll be an informed decision, and it'll be a decision that hopefully will continue the mantra that myself as minister has been saying all along. There's no excuses for what is happening. It's about finding solutions. And this process will hopefully help us to find the solutions to some of the issues which we know exist today. And so as I've said, and as we've outlined here, the process is very engaging, it's very intense, and in many instances very time consuming, even within this one academic year. I understand and I appreciate the fact that, you know, with everything, change is a process. But what I have tasked my team to say is that we're not spending another 2.5 years trying to figure out what we're going to do with these reports. And so we may actually see some changes to education as early as September 2015. But again, it's really too premature to talk about what those changes will be. But that's just to give you an indication that this is, you know, a critically important exercise, and the sense of urgency is being led from the top. Because, as I said, to go back to the key as to why we're doing this, it's about putting the children first. And the longer we delay in making some critical fundamental decisions to improve their lot, to improve their experiences, means that one more child is not getting the kind of service that we expect to deliver to them, and as a country to expect to be providing to our children. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up to any questions, and I'll, of course, turn it over to my acting chief to act as moderator in this regard.
First question, this is more of a clarification point. The inspections will just be carried out amongst primary schools? Or are we looking at some high schools as well?
No, we're looking at high schools, primary schools, the Lighthouse School, but it will be over throughout the academic year.
So
Yeah.
throughout the academic year,
Yes.
all
Entire
schools.
schools.
That's what I wanted.
Correct. Yeah, it's just that the schools that they've so far have been in have been.
That's what I wanted to check.
But
Yes.
the schedule isn't known beforehand to the schools. It's a process that is being followed according to the kind of best practices which have been established.
In terms of cost, how much are we looking at for both things, if you will, the inspections as well as the review?
The governance review will cost around 48,000 CI, and the inspections, the number evades me 1 second. About around 230,000 CI.
Sorry, repeat that for me one more time.
So the governance review will cost approximately 48,000 CI, and the inspections, because the inspections are all schools, will cost around 230,000 CI.
And the review, well, the inspections report, that's due at the end of June next year from what I see here. Is the review as well, the report from that, expected around the same time? No. When is that report due?
The governance review report, we're expecting that in shortly after the start of the new year. But what we've also asked KPMG's team to do is to bear in mind that since we are carrying out inspections throughout the rest of the school year, we'll do a regroup towards the end of the school year to see if there's any data revealed in the inspections process that alters anything in the governance review. But
So-
we expect that initial report to be done shortly after the new year.
So I know we're saying that this is the first time an inspection like this has been carried out, but we've seen reports come out of the education system time and time again. We have not seen action on those reports. How can people be sure that we're actually going to see anything happen from this one?
Well, Tammy, I mean, I thank you for that question. And I obviously am not going to be here to talk about what happened and what didn't happen prior to me taking office with respect to reports that may have been commissioned and carried out. What I have said, and I just want to remind the public as well as yourselves here that this process I had actually started to talk about in my debate to the budget earlier this year, in the summer of this year. And as I said on the floor of the House, and as I said to the teachers at their teacher welcome in August, that the intention is to make the reports publicly available, and therefore the intention, as I said, is to actually act upon and to do based on the numbers, obviously, of recommendation. There will be a number of recommendations I expect that will come forward. We obviously will have to prioritize. We'll have to make a decision as to how, what, when, where, how much. I mean, these obviously are the considerations that the government as a whole will have to take. But I want to give assurance that the entire government, myself, obviously, as Minister of Education, Councillor Conley, we view education as a critically important obligation of the government. And so once I have these reports, once I have the tools to better enable us to take an informed decision, I will continue to advocate as vociferously as I have been with respect to getting this process thus far.
My last question before I hand the mic over. We're seeing a significant chunk of cash being spent on this. Can you commit to a time when we'll actually see action on these reports?
Well, as I said, I anticipate that you may see some actual fundamental changes. What those changes are to be determined, but I anticipate that we will be seeing some changes as early as September 2015.
Can I just add to that, Tammy? Regardless of the outcome of the governance review, we know already that we're going to have recommendations for improvements. The inspections is going to do the same thing. So what we're committed to do is to immediately move to project planning to implement all of those changes. We will have to take them in phases, likely, depending on what the outcomes are, depending on resources availability, depending on how we're going to prioritize our responses. But we are committed to, and not just the ministry, the department and teachers, as Mr. Meredith said, the feedback that he's gotten, the level of participation that he's gotten is really positive. Teachers in the classroom, principals in schools, everybody in the system is wanting to be a good, positive part of this process, and we're all chomping at the bit to get a final report and to put action plans in place to take that work forward.
There's there's been some discussion already in the EY report and elsewhere of moving the governance of some schools out of the ministry and perhaps into the private sector, involving private sector partners. And this is perhaps a dual question for Ms. Rivers and Mr. Meredith. Is that something that your review will look at? What are the advantages of that? And how will you make a judgment call on whether that's something that's required?
Well, I'll start. The governance review calls for looking at, firstly, what we have now, what system is in place, and how is it actually working. So it's looking at the systems, the structures, the operations, the strategy, the policies, looking at the system as we have now, but also, as Mr. Meredith spoke about in his contribution, they were charged with looking at giving recommendations based on the developments in education, based on international best practice, but also based on the best practices identified locally within the system once the review is done, as to how we can further enhance the governance model. Now, one of those models, as you said, that has been recommended already is the charter school route as defined in the E&Y report. That is one of the models that I'll suspect that will be looked at, that will be explored further, but that certainly isn't the only model that is being, that the education review team has been tasked to look at, because ultimately the model that we adapt or adopt or continue with, if that is a recommendation that comes out, with whatever improvements that is being put forward, that model, again, has to be what is in the best interest of the children. And as he has said, not just today, but when they leave our education system, and to be able to be productive and innovative citizens in our society.
The work that I do is never about making hard recommendations to anyone. The work that I do is about offering a number of possibilities, a number of possible ways forward. And they may start even from a point of view that what you currently do is good, it just needs innovation. But it may well be that I will present then a number of other possibilities which are around transformation. But I don't live on the Cayman Islands here. I don't know the islands well enough to be able to make a strong recommendation as to what would work here. I can only say what might be best or next best practice for you, and I will put alongside each of those possibilities what I see as the benefits or potential benefits of each one and the potential risks associated to each one. And from that, then that will be up to the ministry to make the decision as to what that model might be.
What kind of things have been successful elsewhere in your experience?
There are very successful models in other parts of the world where state schools, I mean, we could talk, for instance, about the London Challenge. They're schools who haven't changed really their governance or the way they've been structured in relationship to the government in any way whatsoever. They just carried out some really very, very intensive school improvement practice. And the performance of young people in London went from in the low 20% of grades of level 2 qualifications, including English and maths at age 16, to way above the national benchmark of 40%. So that's just pure innovation. So there's a model which is by changing what you already have, you can get huge improvements. However, there are other models. Some of you are perhaps familiar with the academy system in the UK, where a group of trustees, as it were, is given responsibility for a school or a group of schools, and there are governing bodies that sit below those trustees. But again, some academies have worked really, really well. Some multi-academy trusts have worked really, really well. Others haven't. So this is about looking at the models that are there and that are possible and making decisions based on what is right for the children here, for parents here, for the communities here, for employment and the economy here, and politically with a small p in terms of what people find is right for the Cayman Islands.
You mentioned you had some expertise in curriculum development. Is that something that's been looked at alongside this potential changes to the national
That's something that I've also been doing, that's right, and I will be drawing together the sort of consensus from the various workshops that we've been holding with regards to potential changes to curriculum, which focuses on future need. So it doesn't necessarily get rid of elements of the curriculum that are already there. It might be that it just changes the balance and adds to.
Just a couple of quick questions on the inspection, just practical questions really. How long do you spend in each school? How many inspectors have you got? And, I guess I could check this, but how many schools have you got to inspect in total?
Okay, we have 16 schools, 16 government schools that need to be inspected. And the size of the team will vary according to the size of the school. So it's not the same number of inspectors in every school.
But I mean, how many is in the pool?
At the moment, we have 6 inspectors on island. And it will depend on the size of the school and the needs of that school as to how many we will use in a particular school.
And how long do you spend in each school? Does that vary?
Again, it depends on the size partly, but anywhere from usually 3 days or 2 days. The small schools will be just 2 days.
And all these will produce separate individual reports on each school, and these will all be published for the public.
The Minister, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
that?
no,
or-
that each school will have a report, and those reports will be fed into the ministry, and then there's going to be a summary report, as I understand,
summary.
and there's going to be different levels of. So the summary report will be tabled in the Legislative Assembly. The individual school reports will be made available through the ministry website at the end of the process.
Thank you, Wendy from CNS. I'd like to ask either the Minister or the Councillor. You spoke about it not being just government's responsibility to educate. I think there's probably a lot of people who fought for free education would disagree with you, and that it is very important that government ensures that education is equal and free to all. There have been concerns about moving towards these grant-maintained academy-type schools where school boards and school inspectors in the UK have been taking over schools knowing nothing about education and essentially messing up a bit, and where they've tried to bring in private sector support and cut funding, and it has been a bit of a disaster. Given that private schools tend to always favour the more academically inclined children, and we have a big problem with special needs, what kind of guarantees are you giving parents that you are not selling out the education system and that every child in Cayman, no matter their standard, will get the same access to the equal opportunities that other kids that are maybe a bit brighter will get to?
Thank you for that question. And I'll start off, and I'll give the councillor an opportunity to respond as well. As I said, and when I first started the whole conversation, let us not forget, and I want it to be very, very clear and understood, the only reason that I'm here as Minister of Education, the only reason that I agreed to take on the responsibility as Minister of Education, the only reason that I have advocated, as Councillor said, long before I became Minister Rivers, for improving the educational lot in the Cayman Islands is because I'm concerned about the needs of our children. Now, I haven't been one of them coming through the system. I know exactly what can occur when we have a child-centered focus with respect to education. So the issue of looking to create a system that is exclusionary or divisive or not recognizing the importance of all of our children is absolutely not what we're trying to achieve. So I just want that message to be clearly understood. What we are doing is recognizing that we have, as with every country, we have a multitude of abilities, we have a multitude of interests, and we have a multitude of aptitudes amongst our children. And it's about finding a solution that will actually create a system to best address all of those potentials, all the potential. The purpose of education, in my mind, is for us to be able to create a system where each child and each person can find their niche, can find their strength, because no matter what issues or challenges children may have, from those on the very other end or the spectrum of special education needs, those children still have potential. And it's about trying to figure out, how do we best tap into that? How do we best nurture that so every child can have the ability to succeed in whatever that area is? So absolutely not the system that we're looking to adopt. It is still public education. And as I said, when I said earlier, the government is committed to continuing to fund, support, and provide public education for the people in this country and for our Caymanian people, because we cannot, no country can abdicate that responsibility, or no country can actually wholeheartedly give that responsibility over to anyone else. We are still responsible for regulation, we're responsible for legislation, we're responsible for maintaining standards and improving standards where they need to be improved. So there will absolutely be no decisions taken to not recognize. And the whole purpose of doing this, and including the Lighthouse School and including the provisions for special education needs throughout our system, which is being considered and a part of this review, is so we can ensure that all of our children, those academically inclined, those technically inclined, and otherwise, are given those opportunities. And where we're not doing that currently, that's where I expect to see some recommendations with respect to filling any gaps that exist.
I'll just add in to the minister, Wendy, that view on privatization emanated from the media. It had nothing to do with anything that this ministry has ever spoken about. But just to be clear, and when I say that the government isn't the sole responsible person for education, I meant that we can't go into people's homes, we can't go into people's churches, we can't go into employers' businesses and try to dictate or push that education model. We can only be responsible for, when they come to our schools, what's happening. And so when I mean that it's not just the government's responsibility, churches, parents, family, employers, we all have a part to play in educating our children, and to ensuring that once they're educated, they have proper opportunities to access all levels of employment in the Cayman Islands. So, and just to, again, be very clear on what our motives are in terms of public education. I'm a product of public education all the way through. I would not be here, and I would never be a part of trying to take somebody's opportunities away and to say that we're going to only concentrate on the academically inclined, or the rich would be so far removed from anything that we've advocated for, anything that we've campaigned on, and anything that I personally would be any part of. We've advocated for access to the curricula by all students. And in fact, we've also advocated that we should have dual streams in public schools, where all children, all of our students, can fully get the tools that they need to participate in the wider community after they're finished. So we are looking at the E&Y report, which talked about charter schools. We are looking at the governance structure of schools, but we've never, ever advocated for privatization of schools, and I wouldn't be a part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just check something as well? Because you're talking about this being the first ever baseline inspection. We hear a lot about inspections. I mean, can you say what the inspection unit does and whether that the inspection unit will be involved in this inspection? Because people will be thinking, why are we contracting all of these people when we've had a schools inspectorate for years?
Well, currently, and again, I'm going to answer the question, but I would ask you to refrain from any questions about decisions made prior to me taking office. currently we don't have an up and functioning inspections unit. So that's where we're at now. That's the situation that I pretty much have inherited. But as minister responsible for inspections, I was deeply concerned about the fact that we don't have an inspection framework that isn't in place. And so what I have charged the ministry, and it's actually being, Councillor Connolly is moving this process forward on my behalf and to a large extent. When we're looking at the education law and looking at updating and bringing into force the education framework that we need to do, we're looking at how the role of inspections and that unit will actually be somehow recognized and protected in law. Because I think with respect to looking at school improvement, it's absolutely critical that we have a regime that looks on an iterative and rolling basis at how our schools are doing and how are the delivery of the education services, how does it actually match up to what we're expecting them to do through the policies set, through the legislation set and otherwise. So because of that situation, it was important, and because we haven't had the kind of intense inspections in our system for a number of years, it was important to now kind of reestablish what that baseline is for the entire system and the benefit of doing all schools within one academic year. Obviously, the stress of doing that is a very tight and very rigorous timeline, but also it does give us an ability to take a step back. And even though it's looking at school by school, we can get a whole school picture. And from there, we're able to better determine then where the focus should be. But as it relates to inspections, we don't have a unit that is staffed currently, but that is something that we're looking to do. We have budgeted for posts to try to create this unit once again. And the intention is to make sure that the unit is recognized in law. And that's where we're at. So going forward, we'll have a more robust inspection regime on a regular basis to cover both private as well as public schools.
Well, I'll just add here as well, in that the minister has asked me, like you said, to ring fence, if we can use that word, the authority and independence of an inspection unit. Because when we came into the system, we realized that the full set of inspections hadn't been done since 2008. And we were certainly not experts in education, although we have a very good team of policy advisors and the acting chief officer and the chief education officer. But coming from where we were coming from without all the data points, we needed something where we could set the line in sand and say, here's where we are as a country. Not because we say we're here, but because somebody else has come in and really tested the data that we represent, the progress that we've done, but also looked at the deficiencies in the systems, the weaknesses in the systems. And it's only from acknowledging where you are, warts and all, that you can move on to progress what we all feel is one of the most paramount, aspects of our society, to be able to allow our children to get access to that Caymanian dream, where they can fully participate in all the spoils of this economy. This is where we're coming from, and this is what we're tasked to do, not by the constituents, not by the cabinet, not by the press, from that internal voice that says we're here to do a job, we're here to get the best results for the money that the public is spending. And at the end of the day, we want our children to realize that every bit of that Caymanian dream, whatever that is, be it academic, be it technical and vocational, be it something that we haven't even considered yet, but full access to the curriculum, full opportunity, and being able to become whomever and whatever they want to be in a Caymanian society.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Unfortunately, we have to cut it short. I know this conversation can go on for another several hours, but thank you for coming. Thank you to those in here in media. Thank you for joining us on television and radio. We look forward to discussing this with you further once we have receipt of the reports and we can begin to form action plans to take education to the next level. Have a good day.